Welcome everyone to the April 28th regular meeting of Walpole Select Board. Please stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I got a couple of quick housekeeping items that I just want to cover off up front. So the first one has to do with the 2020 census, which is underway right now. Our representative for the census, Ray Bennett, reached out to me earlier this week and just asked that I provide a quick update. So our response rate so far is about 59%, just over 59%, which is really outstanding. That compares to 52% statewide. So we're ahead of the state average, which is really good. That said, we still have 40% to go. And of course, with the coronavirus situation, that makes it a little more difficult. So what they've asked me to do is just give a reminder that to return the mailers that you all received. If for some reason you don't have the mailer, you can go to the town website, the town clerk, and the census is on the town clerk's website, and you can just follow the instructions off of that and get the census turned back in. Very important that we get our number up as high as we possibly can. Federal funding and a number of other things are driven by the census, so really important that everybody participate. Our town clerk, Liz Gaffey, is on with us for other business tonight. But Liz, while I've got you, is there anything that you'd add to anything that I've said so far?
The only thing I would add is that there is two census probably in your possession. One is the town census and the other one is the federal. Both of them are important to answer. The federal one you can do online. The town one, you would have to mail that in. Seeing that you're probably home anyway, that would be a great time to fill that out and send it in. That money is very important, especially through, as you see, the federal funding that is being put out for the COVID-19 situation. That money only comes by how many residents that we have and by people who answer that census. Very important for your schools, any construction, any roads in our town. Very important that everybody be counted. The federal one, I did it online myself. If it took me 5 minutes, that would be a lot. And so you can always email me back the town census as well at townclerk at walpole-ma.gov, and we can avoid the long lines at the polls this September and November if you answer the census so that you're not an inactive voter. So if you have any questions, there is somebody in the office daily that can help you through both censuses. You can just call the town clerk's office.
Great, thanks very much for this. Appreciate that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is Select Board member Nancy McKenzie isn't able to make it tonight. She's working. Many of you may know that she's a nurse in the Boston hospitals and is on the front lines of this COVID-19 battle. She's working tonight and not able to join us. She asked me to convey that we're going to be discussing canceling the fireworks on July 3rd, and she asked me to convey her disappointment in that, but that she recognizes that that's something that probably does need to be done, and that we have to have public health and safety, forefront and first in all of our thinking. So, want to just pass that on from Nancy. And while I'm at it, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to, of course, all of our first responders. And, Nancy sits with us week after week after week and has been, doing public service work for the town for many, many, many years. And she's an unbelievable person. And her job on the front lines combating this thing every day is a dangerous one and one that we owe her a debt of gratitude for. So I want to just make sure that we recognize Nancy as one of the first responders and frontline players in this fight, and thank her for all of her efforts. So with that, we'll move on into our agenda. A quick reminder that obviously we're remote. We're remote for all the reasons we've been remote for the last several weeks, going back to the order from the governor suspending, certain provisions of the open meeting law, which allow us to convene like this without a public audience, as long as the public audience has the ability to see us and hear us. And of course, that's happening live on YouTube as we speak, thanks to our friends at Walpole Media. We will follow our same pattern that we've been following for several weeks now, which is to say, we'll be very disciplined about the way we go through discussion. I'll call on each of the individual select board members or other parties as appropriate, and all of our votes will be taken in a roll call fashion. So up first with new business, we've got Marilyn Thompson, our finance director, who's here to talk about some debt payment work that she's doing with bands, and we have to take a vote to sign the ban. So Marilyn, could I turn it over to you to fill us in on what we've got in front of us tonight?
Sure, Jim. Tonight the board will be taking a vote on the borrowing we did for some short-term borrowing for some bands, some which we've had in the past, and new ones that, you know, we decided to ban this year rather than permanently bond at this time. It's a $5.5 million ban. It's due May of 2021. The ban payment would be due. We got 6 bids on the bans, and the lowest net interest cost was 1.29%, which is really low for an interest cost. Other than that, I'm not sure, you know, the bands that we're rolling were, you know, traditional ones we've been rolling for a couple of years now. And the new one is the Fields and the new road improvement ban. So
Jim, if I could just weigh in before everybody opens it up. The
Sure.
Fields obviously is the biggest one on this one. Originally, our intent was to do that a long-term borrowing on that up to 15 years, which was what we're allowed to do. After this whole crisis happened, we were set to borrow right around now, long-term on this. Our financial advisors came to us and said, listen, that now is not a good time to go out and borrow long-term. You may not get any bidders on this. Our advice to you is to do a short-term ban on this one, a bond anticipation note, and rebid it long-term come probably about this time next year-ish, depending on what the market's like. But this is going to cover us because as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, we needed to do something about this because obviously that project is progressing. Marilyn, am I about right on that one?
yep, we just wanted to make sure that we had money to cover the expenses were incurred by the end of June. So that's, we needed to borrow. And there's a vote that needs to be taken by the clerk. It was in your packet.
So thank you, Marilyn. Before we take the vote, let me just go around the horn and see if anyone has any questions for Marilyn. So Mark, I'll start with you.
I don't have any questions. This makes sense. So I think next year will be a better time to go out to market. Thanks.
And Ben?
Yeah, no further comment from me. Thanks.
Okay, David?
Was there an explanation as to why there would be no bidders or that this borrowing could not take place at this point?
Marilyn, you want to take that one?
They've had other towns that went out to bid, and they got either no bids or very low bids. Well, low amount of bids, but at high interest costs. And it's just such a volatile market right now. Nobody wants to be on the hook for a low interest rate or a rate that's not, accommodating for them. So they just suggested, where the rate was so low to borrow short term, to do the short term for 1 year and then permanently bond next year.
Thank you. Is there a limit on how much of this borrowing we can do, this short-term borrowing? And where are we in relation to that limit, if there is one?
Well, our whole debt capacity has that huge limit, and this would be part of that number. That $249 million number as our debt capacity. So this short-term borrowing would be added to our permanent borrowing to make up that number. And we're nowhere near that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering that the field project is one certainly that is going forward at full steam. Is it something we should be thinking about stopping at this point if we are having trouble raising money, or if there's going to be some issues with future funding, whether the state's going to be bankrupt at the end of this, we're not going to receive state funds, and maybe certainly prison mitigation I can see being on the chopping block. Has any thought been done to that and on that issue?
Sure. I actually, when all this started happening, my concern was, should we stop this project? The problem is, if we stop it, we've already entered into a contract with these folks. We've agreed to it. Everyone has signed off on it. We could be on the hook for the liability for canceling that. This in no way is impacted by prison mitigation. This was a borrowing authorization. So we were authorized.
I didn't say it had anything to do with prison mitigation. I said that prison mitigation in the future may result in some issues with our future budgets.
Okay, so no, I thought about it. We were on the hook. We entered into an agreement with them, and at this time the project continues. And if you drive by there, you see all the lights are up. So.
Okay, David, any more questions?
Does this have to be in one vote, or is it separate votes?
So
You mean the vote on the bans? You didn't answer.
Is it one loan or is it separate loans?
It's one loan.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and I don't have any questions, Marilyn. So I'll move us to a vote at this point, roll call vote. So I'll start with Mark. Actually, let me do it this way. All in favor, please say aye. So Mark?
Jim, we have to take a very specific vote on that.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that what?
Yeah, so I have this, it's a full page. Do I need to read the whole thing, or?
It can be voted as presented, because each of the board members received a copy of the vote, and they know what
All
it's.
right. Okay, all right, so I make a motion as the clerk of the Board of Selectmen of the town of Walpole, Massachusetts, to certify that at a meeting of the board held today, April 28th, 2020, of which meeting all members of the board were duly notified, and at which time a quorum was present, the following votes were unanimously passed, all of which appear upon the official record of the board in my custody as written and distributed to the board.
Is that acceptable, Marilyn?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Now we'll do a roll call vote. So Mark, I'll start with you.
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
David?
No,
And Jim, yes. 3-1, the motion carries. Okay, I'd like to take our business item number 6 out of order, since we've got Marilyn and her team here. So this is the vote to extend the payment of tax bills. So Jim, do you want to tee this one up and then have the finance
Sure.
team talk about it?
And Lauren, it'd be great if you could chime in too. I know you were part of writing this and developing it. So the 2 items that are before you today are the acceptance of, I'm looking for my paperwork on this one. A new Mass General Law, which will extend the tax bills to be due instead of May, they're going to be due in, end of June. And then the other vote is to waive the penalties and interest associated with that. This is something that was part of the the COVID-19 relief package that was recently passed at the state level. And we think it would help alleviate some of the burdens on some of our residents at this time. I've had the Board of Assessors, Finance Department, and everyone's comfortable with accepting this law at this time. Marilyn, Jody, Lauren, am I missing anything for the most part?
The due date for real estate, it was moved from May 1st to June 1st, and interest would be waived till June 30th on any bills issued after March 10th. So that would be your water bills, your excise tax bills, your personal property and real estate tax bills. So we won't be charging interest on any of those bills until after June 30th.
Thanks, Marilyn. Lauren, anything that you would add?
No, I think they summarized just right. These are options that the legislature has given to the town. Without the approval of the legislature, we wouldn't be able to waive interest, and we wouldn't be able to change the bill dates, the bill due date. So this is intended specifically to provide flexibility to the town to allow its residents additional time to pay these bills.
Jim, you're still on mute.
So I'll open it up for discussion now. Ben, why don't we start with you? Any questions for the finance team or Lauren?
Yeah, what limits us to June 30th on that extension?
So that was
Or could we
how,
go longer?
If I may, that's what the law says. So that's why we're limited in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Mark?
No questions.
David?
I have no questions specifically about extending it. I think it's good. Are we seeing a significant delay in current receipts? Are we having any issue there?
No, we've actually collected from our major tax service that collects on behalf of mortgage companies, and we got that big file already. That was about $7 million. So we're seeing the tax services send the money in a timely manner. We're getting 3 or 4 calls a day from taxpayers asking about this due date change. So I think the people that it's affecting are just going to be the taxpayers that don't have a mortgage. But we're getting payments every day. We're seeing a lot more people use the online service. So far, we've probably collected about 60% of our taxes, and it's not even May 1st yet. So hopefully this will just give everybody a little extra time for those that need it. But the tax services, the majority of our money we collect is from mortgage companies, and they seem to be paying by May 1st.
Excellent, thank you.
And it's Jim. I don't have any questions on this either. I do think it's a good idea. I think it's the kind of thing that we as a town should be doing to, help people that are impacted by this emergency that we're in. So I like the idea. So I think we have to take a couple of votes now. Ben, have you got the motions on those 2 votes?
No, I do not.
So I believe that should be in your packet, but if you'd like, Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I read it?
Yeah, that'd be fine, Jim.
Sure. First, it's moved that the Board of Selectmen, in accordance with Section 10 of Chapter 45 of the Acts of 2020, entitled An Act to Address Challenges Faced by Municipalities and State Authorities Resulting from COVID-19, to extend the date of real estate and personal property taxes that are due to the town of Walpole on June 1st, 2020. That's the first motion.
Thank you, Jim. Do I have a second?
Second.
So I have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. David, I'll start with you this time. So all in favor, please say aye. David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
Mark?
Aye.
And Jim, aye.
Okay,
Jim,
so
can you
the
read the
second
second
motion, if the vote, the board would be, move that the board vote on, in accordance with Section 11, Chapter 45 of the Acts of 2020, entitled An Act to Address the Challenges Faced by Municipalities and State Authorities Resulting from COVID-19, to waive the payment of interest and other penalties in the event of late payment of an excise tax, betterment, assessment, or apportionment, or any other charge added to a tax for any payments with due date later than March 10th, 2020, provided, however, that such payment is made no later than June 30th, 2020.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
Mark?
Aye.
And Jim, aye. 4-0-0, the motion carries. Okay, Marilyn, thank you and your team for being here to cover that. Appreciate it.
Thank you for voting for it.
You bet. Okay, back up to the top of the new business. So our next item is a discussion regarding the timing of the upcoming election, which is currently scheduled for June 6th, 2020. So Jim, do you want to tee this one up and then we'll have Lauren jump in as well?
Sure. I wanted to put this on there because I was hopeful that by today we would have had some direction from the state. Obviously, we talked about it. They've extended the deadline to for any elections prior to May 30th. They can extend it out 30 days. That hasn't happened since then. Since today, we were hoping. So I more or less wanted to put this on the board's radar. There's been, I've had a few inquiries. Are you going to extend the election? If you have the election on the 6th, what are you going to be able to do? Are we going to have the election workers wear masks? And what precautions are we going to take? Are we going to change the voting hours? So I more or less wanted to ask the board to get out of this early. We have a little bit over a month to deal with this. And that's why I have Liz and Lauren in on this call. Liz, anything else that you were concerned with or we should bring up before the board gets into it?
No, just that, you know, we've met all the current deadlines for the election, and we have 2 more to go, which is the last day to withdraw is next Tuesday, and the last day to register to vote is the 15th. It's interesting he put it to the 18th. I know there's a special state primary that's taking place on the 19th. Not sure what they're going to do, and I was wondering if that's why he put the brakes on instead of extending it another month. So that's my problem. My population is 60 to 80. That works the polls. I don't know if there's another way we can, find different people or how to protect not only my staff, but the voters that do come out, because we can heavily advertise absentee and early voting by mail. But that's still their right to come out and vote. And, they don't have to wear a mask. I'm afraid if we require them, then we would have to have them. So we have to be careful of what kind of restrictions we put on this, because that means you need to supply it. And, there's a value to that. So that's, I guess, what I gotta say.
Thanks, Liz. Lauren, anything that you would add?
Well, I think it's clear that the town is left in an awkward or unfortunate situation based on the exact date for its election. The issues that you all are looking at are issues that other towns are looking at as well, but they have the ability to push out their election further if they want to. I echo what Jim said earlier about hoping that we had more definitive information today. I think it's still less than 100% clear what's going to happen on May 18th. And so, the question between now and the date the election is scheduled for is, can the town clerk's office even process all these ballots in a safe way? Can they be together in the office? What kind of social distancing is going to have to be required at the polls? What kind of PPE do we need to be discussing? And there are so many unknowns. And unfortunately, the way the legislation is written, it carved you right out of it. So the options that we discussed just briefly were, one, trying to get additional special legislation to cover the town of Walpole, as well as, just so you know, you're not the only ones in this boat. There are several other municipalities that are also in this situation. So that's one thing we can do, and we don't need to wait on that. We can ask for that now. The other would be to, and if that's the way the board wants to go, we can provide draft special legislation and for its next meeting. I do think there's still a chance that the state is working on yet another municipal relief bill, and this could be something that could get added in there. So maybe you wouldn't need any special legislation. But I think kind of going forward on both options is a good idea. And then the last option, if the legislature doesn't work fast enough, is for the town to go and seek a court order. There is some precedent for the courts rescheduling based on COVID-19 issues, particularly if things are kind of as murky as they are now on May 18th. I think we'd have a very good place from which to argue our case. The judges have been doing remote arguments, so I have no doubt that we could get it addressed in time to avoid the potential exposure of any individuals to COVID-19 based on, unproven methods for setting up elections or dealing with them. But it does leave you in a bit of a spot and is not easy to resolve because we can't just wave a magic wand. So I think no matter what happens, Liz is going to have to, and Jim and I are going to have to be thinking about ways to move forward safely regardless. Even if things improve significantly, we're still going to have to set up differently. We're still going to have to think about checking people in differently, all of that. But in the meantime, if the town doesn't intend to go forward with its election on June 3rd, I think it's better to put it out there that you're looking for a solution, that people shouldn't plan on that being the date, but also reminding people they have the ability to vote by absentee and or by early voting ballots.
So if it came down to it and we needed to seek relief from the courts, what kind of timing do we need? Is it days? Is it weeks? What do we have to do in order to accomplish that through the courts?
Believe it or not, in the town of Westboro, I filed at 4 p.m. and by 4:45, our election, which was scheduled for the next day, was allowed to be delayed. So I don't think there's a huge amount of run-up time. I happened to get a very a judge who really understood what was going on. But I do think that, especially with elections, this has been in the news. I think people are aware of it. The one good thing in terms of the timing of this is that whatever they do for the special state election schedule for May 19th will give us some learning. It'll give us some experience to draw from. And so I think you'll be in a better position at the very least to run a safer election by that time.
It seems to me that just where we are from a calendar point of view and where we are here in the state with the emergency, it seems unlikely to me that things are going to improve to the point where we're going to feel comfortable moving forward on June 6th. And I'm speaking as an individual member of the board. The other members may have different views. But what I'm thinking is, since that's how I'm thinking about it, and I'd like to hear what the other members of the board think, but should we just be simply, moving forward with some plan that says, so first of all, tell people, look, we're not going to run the election on the 6th, and we're going to do A, B, and C in order to make sure that doesn't happen, C being the petition to courts, and be prepared to move the election. Since obviously one of the questions that comes up is move it to when, from the 6th to what, is something we would have to think about. And I don't think that there is any guarantees around that at all. So this is a tough question, but just knowing where we are right now, I sort of feel it's pretty obvious that we're not going to do the election on the 6th. And again, love to hear the rest of the board's views on that, but would like to pursue some form of remediation and communication, immediately.
Yeah.
So I guess, I'm sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to add that in the special legislation, we can allow for a further delay past June 30th. We have done that in other towns. There's a couple of others. Brimfield has filed, West Hampton has filed. I believe there are several others that will be looking at that. So we did build in some ability to push it past June 30th, based on particular finding of it not being safe to conduct the election, et cetera. And even if we were going to go to court, we could make that same argument to the court when we're asking for relief. So I would suggest that if you do want to move forward with a delay, and obviously the board needs to talk about that be communicated. I think, as you pointed out, I think communication is a really big part of this. Yes,
Yeah.
We're going to delay our election, but we're going to do these things. We're going to ask for special legislation. We're going to support general legislation, and should the need arise, we will seek a court order to reschedule.
Yeah, I think that just makes a whole lot of sense. So let me test the sentiment of the rest of the board. So, Mark, your thoughts?
I agree with what was just talked about. I don't think we want the election on the 6th of June. I have a question for Liz. I think whenever we move the election to, a lot of people are really going to want to do absentee ballots, because people, I think, will be hesitant to go out in public into crowds. So can we really work on that? Whatever it would take to get people a ballot in their hands so they can vote, whether that be a letter. Just maybe you could explain that process, Liz.
And then maybe I'll defer to Lauren to see if something has changed. But right now, you have to apply for it. So absentee applications are available on the website. The early ballot application is available on the website. You can send me anything in writing and you can have the ballot. So that's not a problem. So I don't think I can just mail them out. I think you have to request them. So what we can do is we can, obviously when we're ready to push it, after I know the decision that you want to make on this, we certainly can put that on our website, probably our Twitter page and the town Facebook page to encourage early voting or absentee voting. There are two different types. There's 3 reasons to only get an absentee. The early voting is no excuse. So hopefully that's the way most people will go. But regardless of whatever date you pick for that election, all those ballots have to go through that day.
Yeah.
So there's an idea of how many workers I would need to put that kind of ballots through.
Right.
Right now I currently have 158 people who have asked for an absentee ballot for the town election, but that's with minimal advertisement or thought of doing it by mail. Conversely, in 2016, the first time we ever did any kind of early voting, we had 6,000 people early vote, so with that kind of ballot. So, and in 2018, for the gubernatorial race, I had 3,000. So I could see easily, doing probably having, and my thought process is probably buying what I usually buy for ballots for the town and probably doing half of them absentee, because that's what you're going to get in an early voting envelope. So I only have to purchase absentee and official ballots. So, like I said, they do have the right to still show up that day to vote, whichever day you choose.
So I would just say, I think communication is key, because there's a lot of seniors they're not really in social media. They're not really comfortable on websites. So we've somehow got to get the word out.
We can advertise that we can advertise that in the paper as well.
I think there's a lot of those.
And then maybe Kerry can put out something at the COA, make an announcement that way as well.
That may be very helpful to go through the COA.
Yeah.
I do like the idea of pursuing the special legislation and get a court order if we have to. So, thanks.
Thanks, Mark. David, I'll go to you next.
Just the special legislation that occurred earlier that allowed towns to change the voting of any election prior to May 31st occurred at a time when we're only looking at a much shorter window or much shorter time of confinement or quarantine. I'm very annoyed at this point that the state hasn't, the legislature hasn't taken this up and the new parameters and the new reality, to change that date, work on that. Now, the governor had a recent announcement that changed some dates. The school year being ended for the entire school year recently occurred. Again, these are all things that should have, caused them to relook at these dates and put this this authority back to us to give us an extension. I agree. At this point, I don't think we can go forward for the current town election. I think does anybody have an update as to whether or not there's been any activity at the State House to start moving some legislation to extend that deadline?
Senator Feeney advised me today that they're working on it, and that it was in the pipeline, but he didn't have a date specific.
It would certainly be much easier for us if we had the legislation with the new dates and new guidelines rather than having to go and ask the court for a specific relief. It should have been done already, especially if, given the fact that we're approaching May 1st. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, David. Ben, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'm less concerned about the date. I think either through special legislation, whether it should have been done by now or not, or through an injunction, it sounds like we're able to achieve a date that makes sense for us as a town. My concern is more about whether we vote on June 6th or we vote 2 weeks later on the 20th or 2 weeks later than that in July, is that the constraints are going to be very similar to what we're looking at now on the 6th, right? People are not going to want to come out to vote. People who do come out to vote may or may not wear masks. The people who work the polls are going to be in the exact same position, whether it's June 6th or the 20th of July. And so it seems to me we should focus on exactly what we're going to do there. And I don't know, I mean, and this is something in Liz, I don't know anything about the nuts and bolts of this, but is it completely infeasible to have a mail-in only election if we gave people enough notice, if we put it in all the processes? I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm not saying I support that, but is that even a feasible option?
Mr. Chair, if I may, is that okay? Liz, are you comfortable with me? Okay. So right now, there's 5 states that do all mail-in elections. There's about 20 that do mail-in elections for a few things and not for others. And then there's another group that do them once in a while. We have no legislative ability. We have no ability under current law to do an all mail-in election. And even though it sounds like it would be a great solution, there are actually people who are very unhappy about the concept of someone else putting their ballot through the ballot box. And so what they do, even in those all mail-in states, is they have local voting centers. So not as many precincts, not as many polling places, not open for as long, but there's still a vote in person option. The town cannot, so the town, I think even if the town asked, it wouldn't get permission. I don't think the legislature would go in that direction without some more thinking about this. And I would be concerned about us biting off too big a bite here in terms of running things. However, you have the ability to really encourage early voting by mail and also absentee balloting. And Liz mentioned this earlier. So early voting by mail is you can vote by mail for any reason or for no reason at all. It just doesn't matter. Absentee balloting, usually you can only do for 3 specific reasons. One is that you have a physical disability that prevents you from going to the polls. The other is that you have a religious belief that prevents you from going to the polls. And the third is that you will be out of town on the day of the election during the hours that polls are open. One of the things the legislature did in Chapter 45 of the Acts of 2020 is they said that for purposes of absentee balloting, anyone who's uncomfortable going to the polls meets the definition of physical disability for this purpose only. So You can do reverse 911 saying that these ballots are available upon request. You can do, posting on your cable station. You can do a press release. You can work with your COA. You can ask any active neighborhood groups to pass along that information. Liz, I know, said that any writing is appropriate to ask for an absentee ballot. So people can take a picture of their application with their wet signature and email it, and that's even acceptable. So the short answer is a lot of the tools that you would like with an all mail-in election we have right now. And so that's another reason why the legislature has been willing to allow the delay of the actual holding of the election, because people can get access to absentee ballots as soon as they're printed or early voting. And no matter what day you wind up having the election on, those ballots will be counted at that election.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. So it sounds like that's fairly the obvious answer. And so Liz, you were saying that as far as collecting those, running them through the machines, there would still be a challenge for you on the day of the election, collecting all those ballots in one place to count them and put them through the machines, right? That would be...
Well, just to keep staff safe, to keep poll workers safe. So where that comes down to, like, I don't think I would want just one polling location. The way we have it right now, we do have the 3. We're not talking about changing polling location, but I think that would work because we could probably social distance. We have the tabulators are far enough apart, and possibly, for the teams that are going to put the ballots through, one can slice them open, put it in a basket. They're wearing gloves. The one can take it out of the basket and put it through the tabulator. There's more room if I keep the precincts separated the way they currently are. We could do that. And hopefully the most of them would come in that way, and not come in person. But they're right. Like Lauren was saying, they don't want to put their name on it sometimes too. They like the anonymity and they want to know that ballot went through the machine. I still today have people wondering about, do we only count the absentees if it's a close vote?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one additional thing, and that is that the whole idea of being able to hold this election will depend on the planning. I mean, there is no question that in addition to the normal burdens that the clerk's office has to manage with running an election, that there's also going to be a significant focus on logistics. There's no other way to do it. And so I think, Selectman Barrett, you're correct when you say it's going to take a while till we know what we're comfortable with. But I can assure you that the Town Clerks Association, they'll be working on this. The Secretary of State's office will likely provide some guidance, even if unofficial. And, you have a great Board of Health, a great health agent. They will help to try and come up with the scenarios that will make it safe for those who really believe they need to vote in person, and then also for the staff. So those would be ongoing regardless. If you said the election is going to still be on June 6th, we'd have to do it. If you said the election will be June 26th, we'd have to do it. So no matter what, that planning will occur.
Okay. And so as far as the people at the polls, Liz, the poll workers and your staff, what is the process by which you could go out and find other people or seek other volunteers? Is that even a possibility to say other people in town who would get involved in that sort of thing, in that cause? People have shown a willingness to jump at a lot of things lately. I don't know if that's feasible or legal or what have you.
Well, that's just it. The ones that do currently work it are just, their only question to me at the moment is, would we give them the protection that they needed? None of them are looking to not work it at the moment, and those who didn't want to. So now that's a very tight line. What am I say? You're in that group, so I don't want to have you. There's a little discrimination, I feel, on that. So that's a hard line to walk. I would like to reduce the staff, and then Lauren, maybe you could help me out with that. I think with the acts of, Chapter 45 Acts of 2020, I thought you could have one inspector instead of having 2 inspectors that check in and 2 inspectors that check out, I could have 1 inspector at check in and 1 at check out.
We can make a request to the Secretary of State's office for a reduction in staff. And I think that comes down to planning, you know, what's the plan for how that's gonna work?
Right.
So,
And that would be something I could think about so that I could have not so many of that age group. I certainly could put it out there, but you know, then it's like, do we have them sign something legally to say, should they get sick, they understood the risk when they came to work for us that day? Because how else can you know, what else you're saying to these 60 to 80-year-olds? Because that's who I have.
so I, without kind of taking a position one way or another on whether you would do that, I think the point is, if there were people that were not in a susceptible or a known susceptible age group who wanted to participate, is there a place for that? And to your point, Mr. Barrett, Selectman Barrett, I think we could figure out a way to encourage participation by people who are not concerned about health at the same level, without having to make anyone who's currently willing to help feel like they've been set aside. So I think that's another one of those logistics and planning issues. Certainly, you know, this conversation is an open session. Anyone who wants to can listen to it. And you might get some responses based on that. And then I think, you know, Liz is going to have to look at what the data actually is, how many people are willing to commit ahead of time, and then see if there's any holes that need to be filled. So I think that's a great point. And I think, you know, whether we have the ability to add to the team will depend on what we actually need to add, and also on what makes the most sense. For example, if 90% of the people vote by early voting ballot, that may suggest a different way of handling counting those ballots, that kind of thing. So I think at least for now, just putting it out there that there may be a need, and to get names of volunteers, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And just one last thing. I do appreciate, Liz, the information. I was on the website the other day looking at all the information on the election, and everything that you've said today, I feel is really clearly set forward in the website, and people can get the information they need. So that's great. I really appreciate that. And I think that should be ongoing, and that everybody feels that they can go to the website when they need that information, if there are changes for any of the number of the issues that we described. I guess my last, it's more of a statement than a question, would just be that I'm comfortable with the town taking a direction where we say, listen, we're going to have a direction on so-and-so a date, rather than waiting for the legislature, rather than waiting for the governor or whomever is going to make these decisions, to move forward with an injunction to have a date in the future, so that we have control over it, and Liz knows and Jim know when they need to plan for this. I'd be in favor of a more proactive approach, but certainly, you know, Lauren, you have you know, your expertise in that area, I would yield to, but I think we ought to be proactive in this. Thanks, Jim.
So it seems to me as though we have consensus on the board that June 6th really isn't a good date to be planning to have an election. And so I think what we need to do is give Liz and Jim some direction here in terms of next steps. So what I'd like to propose is that we follow the process that Lauren laid out a little while ago, which is to say we've got the legislative action, and it was a middle one that I've forgotten, Lauren. What was the middle one?
One was to seek special legislation. The other was to support general legislation applicable to this issue.
So I think we should do both of those things. And then, and Ben, I appreciate the proactive point you make, and I totally understand where you're coming from. I just think, given that Lauren has told us it's something that we do relatively quickly, I don't know that we need to jump to that. And having heard what Paul Feeney had to say earlier today, I have some level of confidence that this is going to be a problem that gets resolved through the legislature. So I'd like to do the ABC approach and get the board to support that. And then what I think becomes very important is we need to, and you know, Jim and Liz, I guess I'd ask you guys to start focus on this. It's about a communication plan. So all the ways that we need to communicate to the various audiences that, you know, need to be informed that the the town election is not going to be on June 6th, I think then we have to lay out a really well thought out plan for logistics. So on the day of the election, whenever we decide that's going to be, that we can protect our poll workers, we can protect the people who are voting, and make sure that we're doing all the right things there. Liz, I think there's probably some help we could be getting from other towns that you probably have connections with, or town clerk type, groups that you're affiliated with. They could help guide some of that thinking and tell them how are the towns coming at this. But, it's about the personal protective gear. It's about the social distancing. It's about all the things that we've been talking about here to say, okay, what is the specific plan of attack? And what do we need to be doing between now and whenever that date is for the election to get ourselves in a position where we can actually execute on those logistics? I think your point, Liz, on communication around early voting is important. And so we, as part of our communication plan, it's not just about, hey, we're going to move the date, but we're not going to hold the election on June 6th. And we'll talk in a minute about, do we have a date in mind or not? But it's also about the communication of other ways to participate in voting that could make some people more comfortable. Early voting might be a way to do that. So I think we need a plan of attack around that. So with all that said, the big question in my mind would be not June 6th, but then when? I think some of that will be dependent upon, let's assuming that the legislature acts in one of the two ways we've talked about. There's probably going to be an end date to that. So we'd be bounded by whatever that end date is. So part of me says, since I think we're in agreement that we are going to move the date, part of me says we could wait until, our May 12th meeting to talk about what might be a real, a time to pick a new date, because we might be a little smarter about what's happening on the legislative level by then. So I'm open to conversation around that. But I think ultimately what I'd like to do is put a motion together tonight that says we're not going to hold the date on June 6th. Going to ask Jim and Liz to come up with those things I've just laid out. We're going to follow the ABC approach that Lauren laid out. And on May 12th, we'll come back together to review all of those things and ultimately make a decision as to what the new date should look like, perhaps as soon as May 12th. So let me just pause and test the board on that a little bit and see what, reaction there is to what I just said. So, Mark, why don't I start with you?
Sure, I think we're on the right track with that. I didn't understand the early voting by mail option. I think that's a great option, and it'd be great if, Liz and Jim could get started with logistical issues while we do those other things. And I think waiting till May 12th is good.
Thanks, Mark. David?
Yeah, I think Ben had some great points about thinking about how we're going to do this, even if it is delayed. And I think, maybe nothing formal now, but just think about what that looks like. The other thing is perhaps a formal letter to the Speaker, the President of the Senate, and the Governor, and our delegation, indicating, the fact that the original legislation left us out, maybe some historical context of what was going on when the original legislation was being presented, what the closure dates were at that time compared to what they are now. And just explain to them that this needs to be done with haste, and hopefully have some movement on that. Thank you. I think all good points today.
Great, thanks, David. Ben?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. I have nothing to add.
Okay. So I'm going to try and frame a motion, and you guys can fix what I don't get right. But I move that our board vote to defer the election currently scheduled for June 6, 2020, to a date to be determined, I would ask that as part of the motion that we pursue a three-pronged strategy dealing with legislative action, both special legislation and what I'll call regular legislation, and ultimately a request of the courts to get an injunction that would allow us to move the election if it came to that, recognizing that that is something that could come at a very late hour. I would ask that the motion contain language around our communication plan, both in terms of notification so a whole notification strategy, and also the early voting option to start educating the public on choices, and that our motion would ask for a logistical plan that makes sure that we protect, to the extent that we possibly can, that we protect the voters and we protect the poll workers. And then finally, I would include David's suggestion of a letter to the governor and the legislative delegation that lays out, the situation as it stands. We weren't part of the original legislation. When the original legislation was passed, here was the situation, and that we need to be included in new legislation that allows us the date to some future date to be determined. Let me just pause and ask if that motion works for everyone. I'll round robin it. Mark?
Yes, that sounds good.
Ben?
Yes, thank you.
And David?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to assume no further discussion just based on that. And so I've got the motion that I just laid out. Can I have a second, please?
Second?
Motion and a second. We'll now take a roll call vote. David?
Yes.
Ben?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
And Jim, yes. The motion carries 4-0-0. Lauren and Liz, thank you very much for being here with us tonight and helping us think that through. This isn't easy stuff, as it's unprecedented. And we've got a lot to do for whenever we finally do have this election. And appreciate both of your guidance.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Right, Lauren.
Night, thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
And Jim, let's just make sure that we tee this up as a follow-up item for the 5/12 agenda.
Oh, certainly.
Great, thank you. Okay, good conversation on that topic. Moving on to the next topic of conversation. So we have the discussion on the Mylod Fields lease agreement. So quick context here, we have the lease with Walpole Youth Soccer that has been in place since 1994. That lease is up for renewal. It's a 5-year lease. At our last meeting, we had a number of questions that were raised, that David raised. I'll ask Jim in a moment for the status of those answers, and then we can proceed. So Jim, can you give us a quick rundown on where we stand with the...
Sure. After the last meeting, I reached out to Callum and Brad Hickey and explained that some questions were raised, just forwarded those questions along. David sent some other questions later on in the week. I've asked them to answer those questions, and we are still waiting for some answers. They've asked for some time, so I said I didn't see a problem with that. So it'd be my recommendation to table this until next week, till your meeting on the 12th. I anticipate that I'll have answers to most of those questions that were raised. I know on the town end, we'll have answers to all the questions that were raised as far as the deed. What does it currently say? What's the assessor's card say? We're working on getting some ideas or some comps from some vendors we've worked with in the past as to what's the actual value of that space. So that would be my recommendation. Hold off 2 weeks and we'll have a better idea of answers to those questions.
Great, thanks, Jim. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Let me just check and make sure that we have agreement around that. So round robin here, David, I'll start with you. You okay with pushing us off 2 weeks?
Absolutely. I think it's just important that we gather the information and figure out where we're at. Thanks.
Thanks. Ben?
Yes, that's fine, Jim. Thank you.
And Mark?
I'm going to abstain from any discussion of the topic just because I'm on the youth soccer board.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you. Okay. All right. So sounds like we've got good agreement on bringing it back on the 12th, and hopefully we'll have the answers to the questions and we can move forward. So thanks, Jim, on that. Okay, number 4, we have Chief Bailey, Fire Chief Bailey here with us tonight to talk about, unfortunately, a request to cancel the night before the 4th fireworks celebration, which, as everyone knows, is a huge and important celebration here in town. And unfortunately, and for the right reasons, we have the request to cancel this year's event, just given the emergency situation we're dealing with. So, Chief, if I could just ask you to lay out the thought process here, and then we'll take a vote, okay?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So as I put in my memo to you, we currently have about $6,000 that we've raised. The fire department's been doing this function for the last 60 years. This would have been our 61st. We've only ever had one cancellation. That was done when we had the downtown reconstruction project several years ago. We had to cancel that year for safety reasons in the downtown area. With the money, we have a deposit that is due with the fireworks on May 1st. If we pay the fireworks, if we enter into that contract, which we're already actually entered into, because it's a recycling thing every year, the fireworks themselves are $25,000. If we cancel greater than 30 days, I have to pay a 10% penalty. If it's within the 30 days of the event, I have to pay 25% of the contract. So we're talking about substantial sums of money that I would have to pay if we were to wait any longer. Based on the uncertainty of the next few months, still a major concern, and I don't see any end in sight. The social distancing aspect will not, in my opinion, be done by July 4th. Probably won't be done until the end of the summer at the earliest, from all indications of what we're hearing anyways up to this point. So with that being said, I'm recommending that we postpone or cancel the night before the 4th celebration this year, unfortunately, and look forward to next year.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense what you're saying for all the reasons you've already cited, and so you certainly have my support for the request, as disappointing as that is. Let me seek comments from the board. Mark?
I feel the same way. It's disappointing, but it makes sense. Don't want to endanger people, and it seems like this is going to go for quite a while. So, good call, Chief.
David, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I agree with the chief. I think certainly being proactive about saving the money is great. I think I'm at least hopeful by summer we'll be allowed to have at least small gatherings or backyard gatherings, but gatherings the size of our 4th of July celebration. I don't think we're going to be there yet. I think that's right, and so I think this is a good move.
Thanks, David. Ben?
Yeah, my kids are wicked bummed, Chief. They're like, that's the thing they look forward to every summer. And I was like, they're like, this coronavirus thing is just the worst. And I was like, I know, guys, it really is. But yeah, it's the right thing to do. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. So just to make it simple, I'll make the motion that we cancel this year's night before the 4th celebration with regrets. Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Ben?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
David? And Jim, yes. 4-0-0, the motion carries. Thanks very much, Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And also just, I know I mentioned it on the front end, but Nancy could not be here tonight. But she did want me to make sure she conveyed that she supported the chief's requests, although is, like all of us, disappointed. All right, number 5, Summer Street 40B discussion and update on letter from Town Administrator Ashley Clark, our Economic Development Director. So Jim, let me hand this one off to you to give us this update.
Sure. You may recall that the board back, I think in the beginning of March, right before all this started, weighed in with a letter to the zoning board for this project. This is more or less just an update. I thought it might be a good opportunity to have the board weigh in on some of the plans that were that's recently been submitted. I sent those out to you, I think a week ago, and then I sent them out again on Friday. And I want to more or less just get the board on the record so residents could see, and so can the developer, that this board's interested, and we continue to follow this and make sure that your concerns are addressed before the zoning board. Ashley, anything else really to add?
No, nothing to add particularly. I do want to say that the special legislation was passed, so we're on pause with our 180 days. I know that some people were concerned about that, but we're on pause.
Okay, thanks, Ashley, and thanks, Jim. So, Jim, do you need a motion from us on this one?
No, if the board's comfortable with it, it's just your signature on there. I just wanted to, this, before everything came up, this is one of the major issues in town. And I just wanted to make you all aware of it, make sure you're comfortable with it. If you want something added, just let me know and we'll make that happen.
Okay, let me just go around the horn and see if everyone's good with that. Ben, you good with that?
Yeah, I am good with that, and I think it bears repeating that everything that was in our original letter, all of our comments, all of our questions, all stand, right? None of that has been revised or met or answered. So to the extent that Jim described how we had gone through this whole process a couple of months ago, this is essentially the same process, again, given information that is very slightly different, right? So they haven't answered or come back on any of those comments. So I just want to reiterate to everybody that everything that we went through, the lengthy comments, the information that the town put together, all still stands and all bears an answer and is all still for the ZBA to utilize for them to direct questions and clarifications to the developer. So I just want to make sure that's crystal clear. There's nothing that's being passed through here. It's all still out there to be decided. And I also wanted to thank Ashley for all of the effort that she's put into this, and Jim as well. I know there's still a lot of questions that are coming in even now on social media and through phone and emails and whatnot. So, the select board and town hall has been incredibly open, transparent, and communicative about this. We're going on 6 months now. I think that's great, and it's ongoing. So I encourage anybody who has questions or clarifications on the subject to seek out a select board member or Jim or Ashley, and we can get you the information you need. Thanks.
And thanks, Ben. That's well said. David, I'll go to you next.
Yep, it's good that it's on pause. I think people certainly wanted to be kept informed and have an opportunity to speak, and this letter certainly expresses some of those concerns. But when is this pause get relieved, or when is it stopped?
So I think the legislation says we have, from the lift of the state of emergency, we have 45 days to schedule the next hearing. So it's flexible for how long this goes on.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, and Mark?
I agree with everything Ben and David have said. I'm still very concerned about the project. And, my two concerns, which are, we've discussed a lot, are still the safety of the kids and the pedestrians entering and leaving that development, as well as all the traffic impacts of South Walpole. So I think the letter hits on those items, and everything we've put together in the past, goes into great detail on those and other issues. So I think we're good right now. And I like the idea that we're on a pause and we'll pick it up, kind of on the other side of this virus, sort of shut down.
Great, thanks, Mark. And without restating what the three of you have said, I agree in entirety. My number one concern is, of course, the safety down at that intersection and the railroad crossing and all that. And I do believe that we've got to take a hard look at traffic flows and what we might be able to do in that little common area down there in South Walpole. So a lot more to come on that. And So Jim, you don't need us to take any specific action. You've got what you need from the board tonight.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that it gets submitted and in with the zoning board. So we'll be all set. And just if that's it from the board, while we have Ashley on here, she's been doing a great job with the Eaton Walpole campaign and working with the local businesses to try to get as much takeout going with the EDC and with the weekly raffles. I think the Junior Women's Club has donated, EDC's donated. Who else am I missing, Ashley? Anyone?
Sue Spendley is making a personal donation so we could extend the Eaton Walpole raffle for 2 more weeks. So originally,
Who's that, Ashley?
Sue Spendley.
Okay, great. Okay.
And so we get to go, instead of just 4 weeks, we're extending it out to 6 weeks, which I haven't announced yet on social media, but that was exciting.
Yeah, so Ashley's been doing a great job hitting the home run on this one.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ashley. Appreciate everything you're doing there. Hey, I have a quick question for you on the topic. So at some point, we're gonna get out of the the current situation with the people not being able to go out of their houses and shops and so forth being shut down, or at least largely shut down. So what I think might be interesting is, and I actually put a call into Mark Romeo earlier today on this topic, might be interesting to get some perspective from the Economic Development Committee and yourself in terms of how we should be thinking about anything we can be doing to help with a restart, I'll call it, when we finally do start opening up, all businesses, and who knows when that will be. But is there something that we could be doing to help, particularly the downtown area, but everything in Walpole? So I'd really be interested in that. The second thing that's in my mind is any of the federal legislation that's been passed, phase 1, 2, 3, and I think there's going to be a fourth. Is there anything in that legislation that is helpful to either municipalities, meaning us, the town of Walpole, or for the local businesses that we should be advertising and tapping into?
So the first question, we're following grants that are coming out and following and seeing what we can apply for and what would be relevant as far as the town goes. I've also been updating the town's website with resources available for businesses. We've done a couple mass emails to over 350 businesses letting them know about different PP. So the PPP just reopened on, I think yesterday. They paused for a little bit because they had to make some adjustments. So we sent a mass emailing out to folks that we have a list going for. We're trying to keep the website as updated as possible. Things are changing very quickly. I can also tell you I'm on an email list of about 30 economic development planners, and everyone's kind of brainstorming together and sharing resources and sharing ideas. So I think as we move forward, we'll be able to come up with a collective strategy. There's a survey that we put out. We have over 50 businesses that have responded to it. That information will be really helpful for us when we're applying for different grants that are available, because we have the data to say, no, we know that 85% of our businesses don't have business interruption service. So we're doing what we can now, and if there's anything that you think of that we could be doing, please let us know.
Yeah, will do. Maybe what we could do is, I don't know if it's May 12th, that might be too early, or maybe the meeting after that, but and this is what I was calling Mark about, was to see if we could set up a time to have the EDC come in with yourself, well, not come in obviously, but Zoom in, and have this kind of conversation to see what things we ought to be thinking about. And so maybe if you could take that message back to that group. And I don't know if you've got any meetings scheduled in the near future, but kind of talk that through a little bit, and then when it makes sense, come on back and let's have a conversation with the board and see what we can be doing to help out, okay?
Sure, yep, will do, thank you.
Great, thanks, Ashley. You're doing a great job, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Jim, we're to the town administrator's update now, so I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. Just a couple of updates on Corona. At this time, we have about 163 cases, and I'm actually just checking my phone to see, 168 cases. This just came in. 92 cases closed out, with 76 cases that are still undergoing monitoring. So we're keeping a close eye on that through the Board of Health. I know the Board of Health, Patrick checked off to go touch base with them to see if they needed anything. They were meeting tonight at 7:30. The budget for 20 and 21, just a quick update. We're working on both of those budgets kind of at the same time. We believe that 20 will close out on a positive note with collections coming in. That all depends on the fourth quarter. I know David asked, I think it was Marilyn, and Lisa answered the question. Things are looking good, but there's still millions of dollars out there left in collections. So we're really keeping a close eye on that. So on to FY21. Senator Feeney advised me today that the state hopes to have a local aid Chapter 70 resolution passed within the next 14 to 21 days. A lot of that has to come depending on the local, the third or fourth phase of the local, he called it the bailout for states, to see if monies will come into the states on that. So once that comes in, and it's going to be a resolution, it's not going to be one of these types of budgets where everybody gives one budget, then the governor gives another budget, Senate gives another. It's going to be a resolution. All the branches of government are going to agree to it and pass it down to the cities and towns, which is a good thing. So at least we'll know what we can deal with and base a budget off of that. Right now, the budget numbers I'm running is just, I think the state aid could be a X% reduction in basing everything off of that. So we continue to work on that, and I am very confident we'll present a balanced budget to your board and the finance committee whenever we come up with it. We'll be prepared. We've worked on reductions, reducing the budget in a bunch of different areas. So we'll have something within a week or two of the state passing whatever budget that is. Before I move on, any questions on the budget? Okay. Last thing for me, Siemens. Siemens reached out to me this past week. They wanted to let me know that their site here in Walpole has experienced an unprecedented shift in demand for products needed to diagnose and treat patients battling COVID-19. They're working on developing an antibody test here in Walpole to detect the presence of antibodies in the blood. They expect to have the test available by late May. The facility here in Walpole will accommodate more than 25 million tests per month, starting in June and beyond. They were really quick to remind me that this wouldn't have been possible without the select board, finance committee, residents of the town meeting, making all of this possible. So they just wanted to send on their gratitude, and they thanked all of us, asked me to pass this on to the board. It was a nice note. It's really nice to know that a place here in Walpole is making a difference globally and in this country.
Yeah, that's a great story, Jim, and I agree with you. It makes me proud to think that we Walpole are playing a part in some important work around testing, and that facility is going to be generating a large number of tests, which quite honestly is really where a lot of the focus is right now, is on testing. And so it's I think really a great story that we've got going on there, and as I said, it makes me feel proud. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, and I'll certainly ask, but my suggestion would be that we send a note back to the folks in the Walpole facility at Siemens and congratulate them, number one, for figuring that out and being part of the solution, which is just so important to all of us right now. And also thank them for the public-private partnership that we've got with them that really made this possible. I think it's a really, really good story. So I guess I'd ask the rest of the board if everyone's okay with sending that letter. Mark?
Sure, I think the letter's a good idea.
Okay, David?
Did they offer to send a check? Did they offer to send any protective equipment? Did they have any other offers, or they just want to indicate what they were doing with the $1 million a year that we're giving them?
No, the note was a simple, it was a thank you. So they didn't know. I believe, Tim, I'm not sure if they've given anything to the fire department or police as far as PPE though, but it wasn't any offers to me directly.
They did all of our fit testing for our N95 masks about 4.5 weeks ago.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else, David?
That's it.
Okay, Ben? Good, okay. So I I think we just agreed it was okay to send the note. David, I think, I actually don't know. Are you okay with the sending that letter?
That's fine. Why don't we send a letter to all, I think it's 23 local people that live in Walpole that work there. Why don't we send a letter to each one of those individually?
So, I mean, I can't say I mind that idea, but I don't know that we would know how to do that. Do we know how to do that?
I can reach out to Mike Canary and see if he's
Yeah.
got a list, but I can attempt to.
Okay, great. Okay, so Jim, go ahead and do that. Again, I think it's a great story.
Sure. That's it. Just those 3 items for me.
Okay, and I think we've got minutes to approve as our last piece of business for today. So could I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 14th?
I'll second that.
All in favor, please say aye. Mark?
Aye.
David?
Aye.
Ben?
Yes.
And Jim, yes, 400, the minutes are
Just have
approved.
one item, if I may. After the economic development director spoke, we didn't. I just wanted to say a few things. One, I think, people are making use of the restaurants. Just wanted to encourage people, once a week you used to go to Raven's Nest or Conrad for a drink and a meal. Definitely treat yourself this weekend and go out to the nicer restaurants, not just the traditional takeout restaurants, and help make sure that they're still here when this all ends. Also want to think about perhaps, and certainly we need rulings from the ABCC, but working with many of the restaurants to provide some additional outside seating. I think some people might be more willing to come and dine in the restaurants over the summertime, and if there's outside seating, and see what we can do to at least temporarily expand their seating areas outside and their capacities if we allow those seating areas. I suspect that when things do open up, they're going to limit these places to half capacity. If we can expand their seating areas, maybe it gives these businesses a little extra space and a little extra capacity to make it work out for them. And even if that means letting businesses like Jalapenos use the town land behind it temporarily, we can make some financial arrangement. But let's see what we can do to stop that process and give people more access to the outdoors, erecting tents and just having some outdoor space. Not sure what the state's going to allow on that, what the health department's going to say about that, but I think it's something to look towards. And that's about it.
Yeah, I like those ideas, and I think it plays well into the dialogue we just had with Ashley a few minutes ago. So I know Ashley's not on anymore, Jim, but maybe you could just follow up and convey those thoughts to her as well. And again, I'd love to hear, as much creative thinking as we possibly have from anybody, but also especially from our EDC and Ashley. And I really think that we as a board, need to be prepared to get behind some of these creative ideas. Anything we can do as we come out of this to get things moving again for our local businesses, I think is going to be very, very important. And David, your point on takeout right now is also very important. These businesses are getting by probably barely in many cases based on the ability to do takeout. So the more that we can encourage people to go and take advantage of the takeout, obviously do that safely with social distancing and wearing PPE as necessary. But I think anything we can be doing right now to help these businesses, I think is absolutely the right idea. So David, thank you for saying that.
Hey, Jim.
Ben. Yeah.
Just to David's point, I was at a EDC meeting, and it seems like it was maybe a year ago, but I think it was only a couple of months. where Mark and the other folks and Ashley, who are involved with the EDC, were talking about just that. We're talking about setting up a situation where the downtown restaurants could get more outdoor seating, and so they were, knowledgeable in what's required to do that and what measures they were going to take to bring to the select board to help make that happen. So to the extent that, Ashley is going to be discussing with them if they're at their next meeting about coordinating with us, that's something that's on their radar and they've been considering. So it shouldn't be a new item. We should be able to enact that, fairly quickly if it's feasible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it, and obviously it has to be done the right way, but I'm all for it. So let's see what they come back with, and I'm prepared to support a lot of creativity here because I really think it's going to be needed. Thanks, Ben. Okay, any other comments on that topic? Okay, so that concludes tonight's business. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second. All in favor, please say aye. Ben?
Yes.
David?
Aye.
Mark?
Yes.
And Jim, aye. So 400, we're now adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion tonight. And Patrick, thank you as always for your great work in supporting us with Walpole Media. Good night, everybody.